We're on. We're good. Thank you for joining us for our latest Sylvia Findings live stream event presentation thing, whatever you want to call it. This is episode 86, I believe. Whatever. It's up there. It's getting up there. I wanted to talk to you today. My name is Mark. I'll be your live stream presenter today. And I wanted to talk to you today about the tools that you absolutely need to have, like the essential tools. People ask me all the time, well, I don't want to get into it because, I cut stones and I don't want to need a whole other set of tools, or I don't want a thing, or I just want to, buy the stones and buy the things and have them put together easily, or whatever, or I'll just let my jeweler handle it, which are all valid, arguments, all things. But or I also feel like maybe some people don't want to get involved in this aspect of the jewelry making business because it seems a little daunting, which it could, I guess, if you've not used to that. There's this strange preconceived notion amongst people that stone setting is difficult to do, and some of the more fancy techniques like pave or channel setting or those kind of things, I mean they're tricky. They're unless you've done them before and you've practiced and you've done it's hard to get good results if you've never done it before, and if you've never practiced, and if you've never had it explained to you in detail before. Those can be really super tricky. But things like prong settings are, it's not super difficult to do, and jewelers will never tell you that, and they'll charge you, a fortune to prong set a stone in a ring or a pendant. But it's really super easy, and there are really not that many tools that you need to have, and I'm just going to go over the most important ones today. Let me see, but before I get started, is there any housekeeping things? No, I think shipping is all good. Canada Post is still terrible. I give them grief every episode, so it would seem weird if I didn't do it now also. But they still they never fail to impress upon me how let's put it this way. It's always very clear to me how vast the country is and how far away everything is from each other, and how our infrastructure is not, or how Canada Post's infrastructure is not built to be super efficient in such a big space. I'm trying to give them an out here, but it's hard. Anyway, your stuff always gets there, right? That's the only thing that's important. What else? Oh, I guess we have shows coming up again, starting soon. You could check on the website, or I'm sure if you're watching this on Facebook, there'll be links. You'll get the ads pushed to you. Don't worry. Yeah, show's starting up again. That's kind of exciting. I'm actually looking forward to it. It's been, it feels like it's been, no, it has been 2 years since we've been out having shows, talking to people. Well, we did that one weird show in Calgary that still to my mind is, I tried to block it out because it was just seemed like such a crazy time to do it, thing and stuff, but whatever, neither here nor there. Tools. The first, probably most important tool that you need to have if you're going to be doing this as a hobby with any regularity is a good pair of calipers, digital ones, right? That I'm going to turn this on so the battery's dead, right? That displays the but Mark, you say, why calipers? You would think it would be some kind of like a pliers or something, and all those other things can be improvised, all the other things, But the most important thing is having a good pair of calipers, because let me tell you something about stones and stone selling. Let me just turn this. Oh, sorry, blocking the camera here. Let me just turn this around and move this down. When you buy stones, the stone dealer is going to sell this. They're going to call it, I don't know, 13 by 19 or something, right? And that's fine. That makes it easy for the listing, gives you a good idea. But stone sellers are almost always concerned with the carat weight of the stone. So first of all, if you have a ridiculously big pavilion like this one, big curved pavilion, that's not a traditional cut, it's going to make a little bit of difference how easily this sets into a setting. Whoops, why is that not focusing? There we go. All that. But the more important thing is that the dimensions that they're going to list on their thing, unless it's a lab grown. If it's a lab grown stone, chances are good that the stone's pretty beautifully calibrated and it's going to be exactly what they say it is. But which I think they says this might be a terrible example. Oh no, see, right? So even though this is like sold as a 13 by 19, the actual dimensions are 13.6-ish millimeters by 18.83, right? So, I mean, 13.6 by 18.8 doesn't sound as appealing as a 13 by 19 stone, right? Even though if you bought a setting for a 13 by 19 stone, this stone probably wouldn't fit just because of that. So you can't trust stone dealers. I mean, you can. I don't want to cast dispersions on stone. I know many stone dealers who are wonderful, super honest, hardworking people who are just trying to sell stones, but they're concerned more with carats. So if they listed a carat weight of this stone, it would be pretty dead on, pretty dead on accurate, because that's how they sell the stone. That's how they're interested in doing that. Once they send you the stone, they don't care what you do with it. So the dimensions are going to be 9 times out of 10, I would say, they're going to be approximations of the things. So you got to have a good caliper, because if you're going to be ordering a setting for this, a 13 by 19 setting won't work. This one that I've got here is actually a 14 by 20 setting, right? Which I'm just going to use that for the demo, just so you know. And when you're trying to measure a stone, right, if you start out with the caliper all the way closed, it should be 0. If it's not, you can just press this little button to 0 it out. Like if it's pretend this is closed, right? I can press 0 and make that be 0. But anyway, call that 0. And on this one, this is cool because you can change this to millimeters or inches. I don't know why you would ever need inches as a dimension, because nobody in the stone or jewelry industry uses inches as a dimension. I mean, yeah, if you're ordering chain or wire, you can normally order it by the inch instead of by the millimeter. But I can't imagine why you need a caliper with the inches. But maybe, who knows? I don't know. Some, what am I thinking of? Engineering folks still use inches for everything, which is kind of weird to me. But anyway, neither here nor there. And then just open this up and add this to there. Might put that in between there, and then, well, the widest place is where you're grabbing it, 13.63. Then we can grab it in the other dimension, right, the lengthwise. And then for the depth, which is also super important, you can just hold that together. Be better if I can see this while I'm doing it. Right. So this is 9.4 millimeters deep, which is pretty deep for a 13 by 19. Anyway, not so bad. So caliper is super important to be able to measure your stones accurately, to be able to think, because I promise you, the people who are selling you settings, they're measuring the actual dimensions of the setting. They're selling the things based on the size of the stone that will go in there. And, a lot of times we'll have people, we'll send them a setting and they'll contact us and say, hey, dude, this stone just fell right through, or the stone is too big, it doesn't fit. And it's like, okay, well, how did you measure the stone? And the question is always, I just used the dimensions that they told me when I bought it. And those dimensions are always whole numbers, 8.8 by 10, whatever, 9 by 13. And when I actually say, look, you got to measure that with a thing, you can't just hold this up to a ruler and eyeball it. You've got to have a caliper. And almost always when they get a hold of a caliper and, whether they've had to borrow one from a friend or they bring it to a jeweler and have a jeweler measure it, it always turns out that the stone is not the dimensions that they were sold them as, which is fine. Those stone dealer dimensions are an approximation. They're not really meant to be, this is the actual dimensions of the stone, They're normally close, but they're just not super accurate. So trying not to say anything bad about stone dealers, but it'd be nice if they, and I can understand it. If you're listing something on Etsy or in a selling site, 13 by 19 sounds a lot better than 13.6 by 17.8 or whatever. If you start adding decimal places to the stone, it gives the impression that it's going to be harder for you to find a setting for that to fit in. So if you just round it up or down to the nearest whole number, it sounds easier, which, it's true. And sometimes, if it's like 0.3 millimeters off or something, it's not a big deal. But, once you start getting to 0.5 millimeter, when you're talking about tolerances, for a stone setting, 0.5 millimeter might be the difference between, a good fit and disaster. So, number one tool is caliper. The number two tool is this, a rubber bench block, right? Because you need to be able to have stuff being held firmly. You don't want things to slip when you're going to be, setting your stones. Right? You're going to be pushing on things. And when you're pushing on things, you don't want things to be sliding, moving, right? So a rubber bench block like that is great. You can also use, I didn't bring it, but here we go. Some company sent us this, a hockey puck, because we're Canadian, I guess, so this is the good Canadian version of the rubber bench block. If you don't have, a jeweler's dealer, it works the same. It's a nice hard vulcanized rubber block. It's, I don't know, it's probably close to the same material, but yes, this is your Canadian bench block here with a hockey puck. And thank you, who is this? Allied Precision 3D Digiting for sending us that hockey puck. I use it in the office all the time, just because, I don't know, I have it on my desk as a tchotchke, and I do use it. Not for what it's intended for, I haven't played hockey for ages, but anyway, I like it. It works. So, the idea behind a bench block, you could use a steel one, but a steel one, I find, sterling pieces slip on them, very easily. With a rubber bench block, it doesn't slip as much. You can also do weird things, like if you are setting an earring setting, right? Like an earring post, you can, I have my awl here. You can take a tool like this, like an awl, right? And you can see I've done it a couple times, like on this one, on this. But if you just take an awl and you poke a hole down into the rubber, right? Lift it up, and then you can take your post and put your post down into that hole, right? All the way down, so the setting is flush against the bench block, and then you could, push the prongs closed or whatever, and then carefully lift that up, and that's it. Because you know, it's kind of tricky to set earring posts because there's not a lot to hold on to. Which brings me to my next most important tool. This is a ring clamp. This is like ancient technology. There's normally comes with a curved side and a flat side. You can get other ones that have just one side and the other side cinches closed with a little twisty mechanism. I do have one of those lying around somewhere, but whatever, I'm not going to pull it out. But, you know, most of them just come with a wedge like this. And you can get wood ones, plastic ones, whatever. The most important thing is these leather strips, which you almost always, when you buy these, you'll get replacements for these, and you can just glue in when these get really messed up. But having said that, the one I have at home in my bench, I mean, I've had that for like 20 years, and I haven't had to replace the leather things, and I do quite a bit of stone setting at home. The way this works is if you have your ring that you want to set, right? This just goes in there. You have to be careful for split shank rings or things like this that have filigree here, because we're going to be putting a lot of pressure on that. So I'm just going to move this back down to about there, right? Where we've cleared all that filigree work. And all of the tension is on the solid metal here. I just put that wedge down in the other end. And that's held in nice and tightly. And then I can do my work. Let me just, right, holding onto that and then pushing the prongs closed, right? Just something to hold on to that gives you a lot more grip if you're holding onto a great big piece of metal or a great big piece of wood like this than, you know, little thing. And there are also lots of fancy things you can get. If you have a, you know, jeweler's bench, you can buy a tool called a Benchmate. That's basically, you know, a super duper version of this that you can orient this in any direction, you know, twist it around, make it do all kinds of weird things. Super versatile for your bench, but normally just people use these. And then if you're doing it on a jeweler's bench, you know, you have a bench pin. That's why you normally have a V slot in the bench pin, right? It's a straight piece with a slot like V, and this just goes into the slot, you know, so you can, it gets, you know, locked in there. Anyway, ring clamp to hold on to things. I also use this a lot if I'm doing, you know, if I don't want to poke a hole in my thing, and if I'm doing earring posts, right? You can just put the earring all the way down in there. You know, cinch that closed and give you something to hold on to. Gives you a little more stability when you're holding on to it, because all of this requires a little bit of finesse, a little bit of force. I think it's probably more finesse than force, but it's force with finesse, let's just say. And anytime you're doing anything that requires a little bit of force, the most important thing is how stable the piece that you're setting is. So the rubber blocks, so the things don't slide around, ring clamps, so the things are held firmly in there. And that's it. And then as far as actually getting the prongs pushed over onto, can I get that any closer? Maybe. There we go. As far as getting the prongs pushed over, now I realize this is probably, I don't know, this setting's probably a 0.5 millimeter or 1 millimeter too big for the stone, but it's close, right? I don't know. To me, when you can see a little sliver of silver under the stone, you know, that's a deal breaker. But some people don't mind that, as long as it's set correctly. Now, as far as I think here's something else. Here's just like a little trick or a tip. What did I do with it? You can use a little piece of blue tack or poster putty. What did I do with my little piece of poster putty? Okay, never mind. Let me just get another one out. It's probably stuck on the bottom of something. Oh. So no matter how prepared you are, right? So if you've ever used this poster putty, right? It's kind of You know, it's just that stuff that you can take and make a little thing. Now, some people, I think traditionally, people would use, and I used to use this too when I started, as beeswax to do this, right? You could just mold that into a little tiny cone. And then when you're setting your stone, it's obviously a little, more useful if you're doing little tiny stones. This is a kind of giant stone. You can do this by hand, right? You can just use that to set the stone in that thing exactly where it goes. Doink. And then twist that off to get it in there. Right. But this is what I'm going to use most of the time, I find, for prong settings. This is just a prong pusher, or some people call it a bezel pusher. Doesn't matter what it is. The point is it's got this nice big round. Actually, the first one of these I ever had, way back when, in the olden days, was I took a golf ball and I screwed a big screw into it, and I chopped the head off the screw and then polished this, down, so it was nice and beautiful. So it was round, so it was a little weird. It wasn't a square one like this, but it worked just fine. I don't know why I did that, because it probably cost more for the golf ball than it did to the thing. I think my father was a little angry that I ruined one of his golf balls. But anyway, neither here nor there. You can get these. Normally you'll find these in a set with a bezel roller and a burnisher. I don't know. They're not that expensive. The one thing I will say is this surface is the most important surface here. You want this to be as nicely polished as possible. So sometimes you'll get them, the inexpensive ones, they're not very smooth and beautiful. And if you have something where the surface of this is not, see, mine is almost like a nice mirror finish, right? Because I polished this. There are little, dings in this, but that's just from use. If the surface of this is textured, right, you're going to take this and you're going to push this onto the material. And you're not going to do it that way, but basically this gets used to push the prong over onto the stone. And if the surface of this is textured and ugly, you're just going to transfer that ugly texture onto the prong, which you don't want. So if it's a nice shiny mirror finish, if it does any texture onto the prong, it's going to be a nice shiny texture. Now, normally when you're doing this, you can't see anything as far as what's happening, against the stone, because you're gonna, your hand is gonna be all covered up. But basically, you hold this with that bulb, into the center of your hand as much as you can, just to get more, the more security you can, the better. And I always put my thumb flush with the end of that, right? So the tip of my thumb is flush with the end of that prong setting. And then I'm just going to hold the stone down, right? And you're going to put your thumb anchored against the bottom. And you're going to rotate this so that the tip of that, you're going to put the tip of that right up against that. And you're just going to push in by rotating. Now, you never want to have just your naked tool pushing against the thing. So you don't want to do something like this, because when that slips, not if, but when that slips, the pressure that you're putting on there is going to be uncontrolled, and you're going to slide this across the stone. And if it's a stone, stainless steel is 7.5 hardness on the Mohs scale. So if your stone is anything 7.5 or softer, which is, frankly, most stones, except for obviously things like hard stones like rubies or emeralds, diamonds, cubic zirconias, they're not going to get scratched. But softer stones like this fluorite probably almost definitely would get gouged. Now you can see the problem with this not being the right size. Anyway, so that's there. So by anchoring, having your thumb flush with that and anchoring your thumb against the bottom of the table or the thing. Let me just see if I can get this at an angle that's visible. If you slip, it's not going to go anywhere, because your thumb is blocking the tool from going anywhere. And you're not really pushing in. I mean, you are pushing in a little bit, but it's more like you're rocking this, rotating this, because you're going to push this flat up against the side of this thing, and then you turn it. And as you turn it, it's going to push the prong over onto the stone. And when you're done, you should be pushing almost straight down. And that's it. That's all there is. And that works great if you have stones that are not super brittle, and the setting, is just about the right size. Especially on cabochons, that's the best way to do it. These settings are kind of a hybrid prong, right? Where the inside of the prong is slightly flat. There are notches in there. Not going to talk about those this live stream because that's pretty advanced feature, changing the positioning of the notches depending on the shape of your stone. I much prefer these hybrid prongs that are a little bit flat on the inside. They're rounded on the outside, so they're kind of traditional looking, but they can be used for cabochons or faceted stones. And we're putting these on most of our settings now, I think, just because they're just so much easier to use than because a traditional prong would be like perfectly round, and you would have to file the inside notch to make it to make your stone fit in there, set that in, and then cut the top of the prongs off, dome them, file them, make them all beautiful. And that is just a pain that most hobbyists don't want to deal with, I found. So I've seen pictures of our settings on here. We have a couple of settings that are specifically made, with super long prongs that you would have to cut down and dress the ends and make them things. And I've seen some pictures in reviews where people say, oh, I love my setting. It's beautiful, but the prongs are super long and they extend all the way down into the center of the stone. And to me, it looks ridiculous. But I don't judge, whatever. These is kind of a happy medium, between the one and the other. Now, as far as the pliers, of course, chain nose pliers, right? You kind of need these for everything all the time. These are just tapered to a point, flat on the outside, on the inside, rounded on the outside. I don't know why they're called chain nose. Maybe because you can open and close links like in a chain. I don't know. People make up names that make no sense to me, but these are called chain nose pliers. Now, not to be confused with, is there a name for them? There's a tool that looks almost exactly like this, except there are teeth on the inside, right? There's grooves on the inside. That is an electrical tool, right, for grabbing the ends of wires and pulling them around. It leads in a junction box, and the wire is going to be sealed up in a box, so you don't care what it looks like. The teeth is going to put chew marks on the wire or on your prongs or whatever. So or some people use it for leather smithing also. Leather work, leather smithing, is that a word? Leather work, when you have those big needles and you're pulling them through, and you can grab the needle and pull it out as you're sewing, seams on the thing. But you don't want to use those kind of pliers for jewelry making, because the teeth are just going to chew up whatever it is you're working. So it's got to be nice and smooth. And don't feel weird. Like these are Japanese or German. These ones, I think they're Japanese. I don't know. They look like German to me, but they could be Japanese. Either way, Germans, yeah, I almost never find a bad quality German plier. There's just no thing. There's this German work ethic that they would have to flail themselves if they ever made an inferior product, right? So you're never going to find bad quality German pliers. There just aren't those kind of things. Same with Japanese pliers, but some of the ones that come from Pakistan, they might be awesome pliers. And 2/3 of the surgical tools that we get in the country are imported from Pakistan. So don't poo-poo pliers just because they come from a certain part of the world. But so they may be great. And I know that I personally, hear this. I had my own line of pliers that I made way back in the things that came from Pakistan, and these are as good as any German pliers. They were a little more expensive, but as long as you the the factory understands that they're not trying to output as many pliers as they can in a short amount of time, that they could just take their time and make them all beautiful. You know, they can do it. They're a little more expensive than regular Pakistani pliers, but they're great. Anyway, my point is, don't poo-poo them, but also don't assume just because that the plier comes from Germany or things that it's perfect, because a lot of times this edge on chain nose pliers are going to be super sharp, and if you're grabbing a piece of wire and bending it, the bend happens right at that sharp edge, and you could nick the wire and it could break. So I always file that edge on all my all my chain nose pliers. It doesn't have to be a super sharp edge, right? It just has to be a a tiny corner. How small of a bend does it have to be for that to be visible if it's not super sharp? Anyway, it's just neither here nor there. Right. The other plier that you need to have are these stone setting pliers, right? You may have seen these, lots of different versions of these. We have this nice inexpensive pair that I wanted to show you, because just to show you that they're just as good as the fabulously, you could buy a $60 pair of these, but they're not, 10 times better than this $9 pair, or whatever the math works out to. It's got a long edge, wide edge, and a little bit shorter edge with a notch cut in that. Let me just show you that, right? There's a little notch there. And, if you want to, you could also, I don't have a round, oh, I do have. You can also take a little needle file, and if you want to make that notch a little bit smoother, a little bit bigger, feel free to get in there and, file that notch to make it a little bit smoother, because sometimes it'll be a little bit rough, and you don't want to have rough edges on that thing. Yeah, this is the other thing that I always find amazing is people are shocked that I take files and take them to my pliers and do things with them and adjust them, but you paid for these are yours, right? Do whatever you want to them. I forget, what did I do? I used to do this all the time because I was too cheap to buy those, you can get ring forming pliers, right? Where they're wide nose, flat nose pliers, right? So they're flat all the way, the width is the same, and one side is flat on the inside and the other side has a dome, right, on the inside. And they're fabulously expensive pliers. They work great when you're making rings, right, with a blank of metal, because you want to have one end that you could pull the wire around and not get kinks on them, and you have a nice curve on there. So if you just take a nice big file and file that one side into a curve, you've spent $9 on a good pair of pliers, and flat nose pliers, and altered them to be a perfect pair of ring form. Anyway, so my point is, what's the worst that could happen, right? If you're altering a pair of pliers to be more what you need than what the maker intended, anyway, necessity of the mother invention, as they say. Anyway, so the way these were, and I often seen these people work these incorrectly. Like, oftentimes you'll see folks, where did my stone go? There it is. Oh. Oftentimes you'll see folks take this and hold this on the underside and grab the prong in that little notch, right, and push that down. But that's kind of the opposite of how it's supposed to work. The way it's supposed to work is that notch anchors itself on the underside. Let me see if I can do this and keep it in frame. It's supposed to be anchored on the underside of the notch on the one side of the prong. And this is going to be able to work. Let me get that stone out of there. Just pretend there's a stone in there, right? So that anchors on the underside of that notch, right? To anchor that in here. And the bigger side of the plier, this thing, goes all the way over and grabs the prong directly opposite that and pushes that down, or pulls that, I should say, pulls that down onto the stone. Now with this, you get all of the force going exactly the correct direction, right? Which is almost 45 degrees from the top of the prong, which is kind of the same concept as this, you know, pulling it over, because the more this closes, right, the tighter the angle. Right? You see that angle closes as you turn it. I know it's subtle, but that's how physics works, and that's how those work. So when would I use, you know, one over the other? If it's a bigger thing, like a big setting like this, I almost always use these. I think if they're smaller, harder to hold on to, sometimes I'll use these, because you can actually hold on to the piece with the pliers as you're you can hold on to the pliers as you're working with it, right? And that helps hold on to it, keep it steady. It's all about keeping it steady. And if people tell you that there's one right way and there's only one way, I think you got to stop listening to them, because there's not really one way to do any of this stuff. There's a way, and then there's another way, and whatever way works best for you is, you know, the way you should do it. Right? Other tools, I don't know, it's always good to have a nice set of needle files in case you have things that are pre-notched, you know, like these, and the notches hit exactly where the girdle of the stone is, right, where that edge is. But you need it to be bigger, right? You can always get in there and file those little edges. Or sometimes if the stone sits too high in the setting and you need to file the inside edge of the seat, right, which is this. I think you can definitely do that, file that into a little bit of bevel, because these ones on these settings and on a lot of settings, let me see if I can get this in focus. You can see that the seat is a round piece of metal, right? Almost like you're making it out of a piece of wire. So the stone is going to sit that and hit and sit at a certain, you know, position. And if you needed the stone to sit further down in there, if you file the inside edge, right, into a little bevel, the stone can fit further down, which could also help you. Some setting, do I have one here? I don't. But you can see some settings, sometimes the seat, right, that inside edge where the stone sits on, can be pretty wide. Could be already beveled. And sometimes I think these settings are always designed with a very traditional cut stone in mind, right? So, and I'm going to talk about this next week. I think I'm doing I'll do a talk on things to look out for when you're buying stones, gemstones. Here's a little preview of next week's live stream. So the problem is that normally, traditionally, and I'll have diagrams and everything, this angle is more like 43-ish degrees, right? Anywhere from 41 to 45 degrees. And on something like this, where it bulges out and goes all the way around, it's not going to sit in a traditional setting the right way. You know, so you need to use a setting that's a little bit bigger than the stone you intend it to be, or I don't know, you could file the inside edge of that seat to make it sit in there. And then the only other thing that I like to have, of course, you know, you need a polishing cloth to polish it up after you're done. These polishing things, you can get these, I don't know, nail shops. We sell them. I think one side is a little bit more coarse and one side is almost smooth. These are a micro abrasive thing, so you know, once you get those in there, if the tip of your bezel pusher is not super smooth and you don't have a super smooth anything, you can take this and rub this along the thing and make a nice shiny, you know, surface on that. Beware that on settings like this that are rhodium plated, or you know, with the rings like this that are rhodium plated, that when you push this over, and if you're going to file that onto to that to make it smooth again, to make it beautiful again, you might remove enough of the surface that you're down to the sterling, and you know, which is not a bad thing. And you'll almost never notice, because especially on a ring, right, the tips of the prongs are the things that get rubbed you know, the most all the time. So it's not like it's ever going to tarnish differently or whatever, but it's just to be, you know, just so you're aware. The only other thing that you know, people ask me, rotary tools, like a flex shaft. This is my handpiece from a Fordham flex shaft. I've had this thing for like 30 years. And different polishing bits, right? Let me see, I've got a whole bunch here. All these grinding wheels are of different grit. So if you are changing like suppose these are just, you know, way too long and you need to cut these down. I'm not going to go into this. I think I did this in a previous one, but I might do a little bit more advanced or how to in an upcoming video one day. But if you need to, you know, cut these down, when you cut these down, right, with a good pair of cutters, the tips of these things are not going to be rounded anymore, right? Like they're rounded. So you can get a tool like this. Oh, let me get it out. This is called a cup burr. I don't know if you can see the inside of that. It's like a cup, the shape of a cup. You put this in your rotary tool, and after you've cut that down, you can put that down on top of that and spin that around, and meow, that files the top of that into a nice round little dome again. And then, you know, it's going to be a little bit coarse, but it'll be close. And then using these polishing wheels, I have ones like this wheel. That, I don't know if you could see the edge of how that's kind of like I think that's just from me using this against the inside edge of a prong. And after a while, you get that little bit of groove in there. It just makes it super easy to get a nice, beautiful, smooth edge. And the way these work is you would normally start with a coarser one, and this one on this set, and every wheels are different, but this one, the white, is the most coarse. It doesn't really look white, but trust me, it's white. And then gray is the next most coarse, right? And then periwinkle, that periwinkle is almost beautifully smooth. And then the most, I don't have it here, they're probably all, oh no. And then the most fine one is this pink. With the pink one, you'll get like a nice mirror finish on the surface of that. And then the only other thing that I like to do after that, using a muslin burr. This I think is felt, but here's one that's muslin. It's an old one. Normally they're quite a bit bigger than this when they start out. But you get a little bit of rouge on there, which is just a polishing compound, and you can spin that around, and then that files that. It's like a tiny micro abrasive that makes the surface of that beautiful. And so really, I mean, that's the only tools. A lot of this stuff is optional, of course. I would say the only ones that aren't optional are, like I said, the caliper. This will pay for itself in angst and, you know, in no time. And they're not expensive. You can get a good pair of these for electronic ones for like $30 Canadian, less in American, of course. You know, maybe about the same. So, I mean, excuse me, you'll be able to find these for like hundreds of dollars. You know, is it necessary? No, not really. But, you certainly can. Oh, what's the other thing? You know what? I can probably show it on this. Can I show it on this? No, it doesn't really work. On the non-electronic versions of this, right? I don't have one here. I have one at home because I used to use it for ages ago. People have trouble, you know, they figure that if they put the stone in there, then they're measuring from, you know, where the thing is on there to there, and it's not. It's always like, oh, I don't want to confuse you. So never mind. Let me just carry on. Just get an electronic one. They're not that expensive, and they're going to pay for themselves in no time, because you won't be returning pendants that you're ordering the wrong size because you've ordered stones that were ostensibly 8 by 10, but when you got them, they're like 8.4 by 9.6, and then all of a sudden your setting doesn't work. So that's the most important thing. And a rubber block or a hockey puck, whatever. I mean, every Canadian household has one of those lying around, right? Okay, is that too cliche? Sorry. And a bezel pusher, right? Or a prong pusher. I call it a prong pusher, but some people call it a bezel pusher. Bezel rollers are a little bit different thing. And then these stone setting pliers, right? They don't have to be a super expensive pair. The super expensive ones normally, they'll look the same. They might have a little bit more polished notch here for the back end of the prong to the underside of the prong to get into, right? But they all work. So that's it. I hope that was even remotely informative. If you have any other questions about anything that I talked about, or anything I didn't talk about, any other comments, concerns, criticisms, we're here for you. We are a jewelry resource that you're welcome to use, even if it's not specifically stone setting related. I answer questions all the time about soldering and fabrication, things that have, well, soldering kind of does, because we have some products that need to be soldered. But a lot of times it's just questions about jewelry making in general that helps inform how the settings that we do have work. So the more just a couple things. And it's totally self-serving. I'm going to put that right out there. The more educated the customer base is, obviously, the more sophisticated the jewelry becomes, and then the more they'll spend. Let's be honest. This is a business. We're here to help you, educate you and help you learn some things so you'll buy more of our products. On that note, thank you for joining us for our weekly Wednesday live stream. I'm going to get in so much trouble for that. We'll see you next week, next Wednesday, where I'm going to talk about things that you should look out on stone settings and or when you're shopping for stones. And I'm going to make some stone dealers mad. Oh boy, I already know I am. But that's okay, because people who sell stones who don't make jewelry don't always pay attention to what's important as far as stones go. And people who make jewelry who don't cut stones don't know the tricky things about stone cutting. So it's there are very few people these days, I've noticed, that do both, that cut stones and also make jewelry. Because it seems like once you start getting into one stream of work, and you start getting really good at that, you just want to keep doing more and more of that. So there's just not enough years in a person's lifetime to become really, really good at both jewelry making and stone cutting. So trying to cut out the middleman by getting the pendants made specifically for you so that you can get that. But there are things that you need to look at, things you need to worry about. And now if we're making custom settings for you, you don't have to worry about anything, because everything that we build will be designed specifically for the stone that you have. So even if it's some weird cut, some weird shape, some weird pavilion, different weird things, we take all that in consideration when we're building the setting, designing the setting around the stone. And I could talk about that another time. But in the meantime, I will see you next week, Wednesday, March 8th. Is it for, yeah, March 8th, 10:30 a.m. Pacific, and extrapolate it out to whatever time you are. So take care of yourself, take care of the planet, take care of your mental health. I know it's hard right now. world is imploding around us. But this is why we have wonderful things like jewelry making to help us get into that meditative fugue state. Somebody gave me a name for it. Muga, something like that. Anyway, this helps. This helps. Stay positive. Take care of yourself. Take care of the planet. Take care of your mental health. And we will see you next week. Alrighty, bye-bye. How do I do this? Finish.